probably turned them off, so.
Okay.
So I don't, we're gonna do a test real quick.
Okay.
Great if you can talk into it.
Okay.
Then if you want to move it up, I can turn it back down. I didn't think we wanted in the face.
Oh, yeah. So,
Did you got that up? So we're just gonna go straight through. If he's okay and if he's ready, just let me know. Yes. Yes. Okay, bye. All right, well, tell Jay that we're going to do a test real quick. Bye. Testing 1, 2, check, check.
1, 2, test, test.
Check, check.
He's got plenty of volume.
All these should. I gave that volume. You need more volume? Okay. I thought you said you needed more volume.
No, I think it's good. You can hear this fine.
Okay.
1, 2, 1, 2.
So I just give this to Alan, and he comes back in, he's the other microphone guy. I will be, yeah, I've still got to figure out what my class is doing. Hey, Colin, how you doing? Good?
Everybody's out there assignments, so they came to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's probably
I got it.
find something tonight.
Thank you.
We haven't. I haven't had time. Did you go to the homecoming concert this week? Did you go to the game? How was the stadium environment? Was it better?
And come back and see. You're gonna look back.
Okay.
Yeah, that's always fun. It's the cigar zone. Which, I gotta go to that tomorrow too. No, but I still always do. I just always do it.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I was. Yeah. Yeah, because I was able to see the video. Right, like from in the middle of it. Yeah, exactly. But, so I was still in Sacramento, so we were wrapping up our last round that night. We were getting back to the hotel. send you a reminder email for Monday, well, the day of. Yes. And I can talk to her about that as well, because I'm in for class, so I see her twice a week. So she can at least fill me in on what's the deal with his age. She is so that's what oh, okay, cool. Is that how that swung? Yeah.
Bill, you're in the first spot, sir, as usual.
So you look at like Columbia.
I'm looking at, I really like, I visited Portland over the summer, and I really like the area. I also like some Boston schools, like Boston College, and stuff
I
like
would just
that.
talk to Professor Steele.
I'll
I think you
apply
get my little
here,
introduction. I'll
but
stand
since I
at the
didn't
podium
do
because that way I
undergrad
can
here,
see the PowerPoint.
Okay.
yeah, I've been here like 4 years.
Guys, can I just visit for 1 second?
Yes.
We're thinking that because the PowerPoint is directly behind us when we're speaking, so you might want to follow suit, so everybody's got a uniform. Is that cool? Okay.
So you can take this one forward.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's fine.
All right.
That's a great idea.
That is good.
Do you want Bill and me to do that too? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I was walking out.
Yeah, we did talk about this. So we're gonna go in this order and we're gonna stand at the podium. We just decided. But when we get to questions, when we get to questions, let's get all these off. I'm turning all of this on.
Okay, so let's look at the paper. Yep, so, okay.
I just did. I'm pretty sure I had. It didn't go.
Well, I realized, like, I tried doing that, and then I realized that some classes, like, depending on what reading, you know. It's really just like, I don't have any time to not do a second kid. So it's like when I go home, there's no work getting done.
Wait for 2 hours.
See, here I was supposed to go be a little better because I only had class 4 days a week.
Well, I mean, you can't wait for your free.
What's your job today? I might give you another one. It'll be real simple. All right, come on now. Here we go.
Righty, good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Tolerance Means Dialogue. I am Dacre Steele, and I serve as Director of Diversity and Inclusion and an Assistant Professor of Law in Residence here at the University of Alabama, Hugh F. Culverhouse Jr. School of Law. Our topic for today's dialogue is religion and gay marriage. Do they have to be at odds, and can university students make a difference? Versions of this program have been held at law schools around the country, and we are excited to join the list of law schools who have hosted a dialogue. I'd like to thank Tolerance Means, the First Amendment Partnership, the American Constitution Society, the Federalist Society, and Outlaw for co-sponsoring this program. I'd also like to recognize Dr. Christine Taylor, Vice President and Associate Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the University of Alabama. I'd also like to thank you all for attending. Your attendance at today's program shows that you are interested in honest, meaningful, and productive dialogue. You can and should participate in this dialogue. You can do so by asking questions or making comments after we hear from our dialogue catalysts and scholarship recipients, and by tweeting your questions and comments to @ToleranceMeans. Again, that's @ToleranceMeans. For the @ okay, so I was trying to get clarification on the @ versus the hashtag. They're the same. @ToleranceMeans Bama, and then don't forget to hashtag Tolerance Means Bama. So again, we will pick one student, sorry faculty and staff, you are ineligible, but one student to receive a social engagement prize of $250, and that student will be announced at the end of this dialogue. And to participate, all you have to do is tweet during the program. Today we have more ways than ever of communicating, yet it seems as if most people speak at each other, speak past each other, or simply don't speak at all. It can take courage and patience to engage with someone with whom you disagree. Dialogue requires putting aside assumptions you may have that could distort certain viewpoints. It requires focusing on common interests rather than divisive ones. And it requires making a special effort to include people with whom you disagree. The Tolerance Means dialogues are public discussions designed to bring together students and thought leaders to find more constructive approaches to living together in a pluralistic society. Allow me to introduce our dialogue catalysts and scholarship winners. To my immediate right is Professor Bill Eskridge, Professor William Eskridge, Jr. He is the John A. Garber Professor of Jurisprudence at Yale Law School. Professor Eskridge's primary legal academic interest has been statutory interpretation and gay rights. Together with Professor Philip Fricke, he developed an innovative casebook on legislation, which half of the 1Ls in the room will be using next semester in my legislation and regulation class. From 1990 to 1995, Eskridge represented a gay couple suing for recognition of their same-sex marriage. Since then, he has published a field-establishing casebook, 3 monographs, and dozens of law review articles articulating a legal and political framework for proper state treatment of sexual and gender minorities. He is the co-author of the book Gay Marriage, For Better or Worse, What We Have Learned from the Evidence, author of Equality Practice, Civil Unions, and the Future of Gay Rights, and is co-editor with Professor Wilson of the book Religious Freedom, LGBT Rights, and the Prospects for Common Ground. He also serves as faculty advisor for the Federalist Society at Yale Law School. To his right is Professor Robin Fretwell Wilson. Professor Wilson is the Roger and Stephanie Jocelyn Professor of Law at the University of Illinois College of Law. Professor Wilson founded and directs the Tolerance Means dialogues. She also directs the Fairness for All initiative, which provides tangible support and advice to legislators seeking to balance religious freedom and LGBT non-discrimination protections. A member of the American Law Institute, she is the author, co-author, or editor of 11 books, including Religious Freedom, LGBT Rights and the Prospects for Common Ground, and Same-Sex Marriage and Religious Liberty. Professor Wilson assisted the Utah legislature as it enacted its landmark anti-discrimination and religious freedom legislation, and is presently working with the United Arab Emirates Judicial Department to permit expatriates to resolve family law matters using the laws of their home country and of their faith tradition. To her right is Crystal Smitherman. Crystal Smitherman was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. She graduated with honors from Hampton University with a Bachelor of Science in May 2015. While at Hampton University, she played on the golf team all 4 years. Crystal is a 3L at the University of Alabama Culverhouse School of Law and will graduate in May 2019. Currently, she serves as president of the Black Law Students Association, a law school ambassador, and is a member of the law school's trial advocacy team. She is very passionate about advocating for adequate health care and helping those in need. And she has fans. And to Crystal's right is Shannon McNamara. Shannon is a senior at the University of Alabama, pursuing an English major and a political science minor. She is looking to attend law school next year and is currently in the application process. Hopefully she'll be coming our way. She adores her hometown of Cornelius, North Carolina, and when she is not studying or cheering on the Crimson Tide, she enjoys reading and spending time with her beloved German Shepherd, Odie. We will now hear from Professor Eskridge, Professor Wilson, Crystal, and Shannon in that order.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. By the way, you should apply to Yale Law School. It's in New Haven, as well as the University of Alabama. Now, I have more than 5 minutes left. I have 7 minutes left. What I want to do is, of course, express my appreciation for being here. I'm from rural West Virginia, and I noticed very proudly today that Nick Saban, well known in these parts, has gotten involved in West Virginia politics, which is where he was born. So West Virginia has given you the tolerance dialogue person, and more importantly, your winning basketball coach, or your football coach. Sorry about that. Now, what I want to do is situate this a little bit historically and introduce you to some of the couples who have brought us to this point in American history. The marriage debate, where same-sex couples have been asking for the right to have their relationships recognized as civil marriages, not religious marriages, but civil marriages, is older than most of you and maybe many of your parents. It goes back as far as 1971 and 1972. Baker and McConnell, depicted there, were the first couple. There were other couples also in the early 1970s. Donna Burkett and Mononia Evans were the Milwaukee couple. And then in the 1990s, 20 years later, there were a series of lawsuits, the most famous of which is the Hawaii lawsuit brought by 3 couples. The lead plaintiffs were Nania Bayer and Janora Dancel. None of those lawsuits was successful. Most of the lawsuits were dismissed very early on. The first successful gay marriage lawsuit was brought in 2001 in Boston. And the lead plaintiffs were Holly and Julie Goodridge. They're on your right. Annie, their daughter, is in the middle, and Mary Bonato, slicing the cake, is their lawyer on the far left. The Goodridge decision itself was handed down in 2003. It was a state Supreme Court decision in Massachusetts, and there were actual marriage licenses who started handing out in 2004. A number of other states followed Massachusetts, though again, most of the efforts were losses. A number of other states, including ultimately California, followed Massachusetts. The final wave of lawsuits was brought in the Sixth Circuit. Now, the Sixth Circuit is Midwest, middle of the country, Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And there were several couples from all the states but Michigan. Michigan, there was just one couple, April DeBoer, Jane Rouse, and there are 3 of their children. They're now raising 5 children in their household. Here's the Supreme Court that decided what ultimately was called the Obergefell decision, which recognized marriage equality for all of the states. Now, particularly now that we have nationwide marriage equality, Alabama actually started handing out marriage licenses before Obergefell. Obergefell in June of 2015. You all started earlier than that because of the Searcy decision. So you've been issuing the marriage licenses for a while. And in the period, I think, that you've been issuing marriage licenses, no church has been, and this is true of other states as well, nor will be required to celebrate same-sex marriages. And no church has or will lose its tax exemption for that reason. I know there is some fear among some churches that they will at least lose their tax exemption. And I've written in the book that Robin and I are publishing what I think will be an authoritative and definitive account of why not only should that not be the case, but legally that cannot be the case, and I think also constitutionally, relying on the Hosanna-Tabor decision, which was a unanimous Supreme Court decision interpreting the religion clauses. So in my opinion, some of the most prevalent fears are not fears that the law would recognize or that the law would carry out. That does not mean there are not legitimate clashes that will come, but I also want to narrow them in this way. That same-sex marriage, therefore, per se, does not clash with religious liberties. The cases you read about, which are consequential, serious cases, the baker, the photographer, the florist shop, that cater to different sex weddings only, and therefore obviously not same-sex weddings, are not brought under Obergefell. They're not brought under state marriage laws. Instead, they're brought under laws that bar discrimination by businesses on the basis of sexual orientation or sometimes gender identity. These cases have been mainly sexual orientation. Now, Alabama has no statewide sexual orientation anti-discrimination law, as many states do not. Birmingham, and we were informed this morning, Montevallo, a little city south of here, do have municipal anti-discrimination laws that apply to sexual orientation, and I think gender identity as well. Now, one rational approach would be for the Alabama legislature to pass a law worked out by the various stakeholder groups for the entire state. And here are some of the issues that the legislature might address. Other legislatures have addressed these issues. It seems to me this would be very relevant in Alabama as well. So, for example, what is covered by the anti-discrimination law? That's a matter that legislators can decide based upon input from lawyers like you all, senators, obviously, and religious figures. Should the law cover public accommodations? If so, how broadly should public accommodations be defined? This is all a matter for the legislature. Should there be exemptions or allowances for religious organizations? I think certainly there should be. But exactly what should they be? How broadly should religious organizations be defined? Not just churches, but how much beyond churches should they be defined? Should they include Catholic charities as well? Should they include religious schools as well? And then what other exemptions, like for small employers, which many states have and the federal government does, and allowances, for example, a Catholic innovation for domestic partnership laws has been allow employers to provide health insurance to designated beneficiaries if their faith tradition does not allow them to recognize same-sex married people as spouses. Now, there is at least one very successful recent attempt to address these issues in a very red state. You might think you're living in a red state. Your red state is pink compared with Utah. And yet Utah has passed a 2015 anti-discrimination law. They're not burning a flag or anything. They're holding up, that's the governor holding up this anti-discrimination law rather proudly. We call it the Utah Statute of Principles. And we think it can be replicated in other states based upon good faith negotiation among key stakeholders, including churches, LGBT groups, businesses, leadership by key political leaders, and very importantly, creativity, devising new ways to accommodate traditionalist religions and religious folk together with equality and dignity for LGBT persons and LGBT relationships. Now today, there are as many possibly as 1 million LGBT persons in America who are legally married, some of them in Alabama. That is only going to grow. That is a picture I took a year ago of Mike McConnell and Jack Baker, who are still together, and their marriage was just recognized by Blue Earth County in September of 2018. And then this is the post-wedding picture of April and Jane, and that's Ryan's hand, because in their wedding ceremony, they not only exchanged vows between themselves, but each parent and each child exchanged vows that they would be committed to one another as parent and child and as a family. Thank you very much.
Such a privilege to be here with you and to be with Bill, who have been quite a team in trying to speak for the idea that we can live together as one people. Actually, if you look at this room, let me point out some folks that are here with you. First of all our millennials, you're the way forward because you've grown up with unprecedented diversity. So I think you are going to have the insights that we need to bottle and send across America if we're going to try to figure these things out. Very blessed to have Dacre with us and all the work that she's done on diversity here at the law school, and of course that you're doing around the university. We have state senators, we have judges, we have folks from the Birmingham AIDS Outreach, we have folks from prominent churches in Alabama and this part of the state. And so I think this is actually sort of ground zero for really talking in a thick way about how we live together. Now, I'd like to go up to the 60,000-foot level and do sort of the pointy-headed academic thing for just a moment and sort of give us some grounding on where we are in the United States. So we talk a lot about red and blue America. I want to talk about red and bumpy America. So every place on this slide that is bumpy is a place where LGBT persons are protected from discrimination in ordinary things, as they are now in Montevallo and in Birmingham. Things like housing, hiring, going to a restaurant like Side by Side, where I was last night with some faculty. And in all of these contexts, presumably each of us in this room thinks that a person's sexual orientation or gender identity is just flat irrelevant. Now, without exception, in the bumpy parts of the map, laws were passed before a marriage equality came on the scene, before it was either recognized by courts or enacted by state lawmakers. And that means that these laws could not speak to the kinds of clashes that we see in the culture war, almost by definition, the ones that have developed around marriage, which 51% of Americans still see as a religious institution. So they couldn't think about that religious nature of those clashes because they were written before it. Now, these older laws, though, have become the lens for thinking about the interests of LGBT persons and the interests of people of faith. And so they almost inadvertently gave us a culture war fight in the cases that we've seen, like Masterpiece, the Colorado baker that Bill just mentioned, who refused to make a cake for a gay couple, citing his religious beliefs. So the outcome of that case was actually really unusual because the court undid a penalty as to him, as to this one baker, because a member of the Civil Rights Commission had disparaged the baker's religious beliefs about marriage, and in the view of the court, meaning that that baker did not get a fair shake in the adjudication. They kicked the can down the road, though, about what it would mean if, for example, the Civil Rights Commission had talked about the values of non-discrimination law and including everybody. So they never really get to the nub of how do we live together as one people? I'll come back to that in a second. In the rest of America, which is flat on the map, LGBT persons have no protection in state law, and in many parts of these states, and no protection in municipal law against discrimination in housing, hiring, or public accommodations. This is a public accommodations map. What does that mean? It means they could be kicked out of a hardware store, like happened in Tennessee after Obergefell, because the owner didn't like the outcome in that case. Now, I think all of us can agree there's no moral content to buying a hammer, right? There's no reason that you would ever kick anybody out of your hardware store except, as I can see, animus. But some people in the faith community believe that they should oppose protections for LGBT persons on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, SOGI, because somehow those protections are going to put religious people in the crosshairs. If there's one lesson from Utah, it is that it doesn't have to go that way. People of faith can be given assurances that they can follow their faith values, and LGBT people can be not kicked out of hardware stores or restaurants, and they actually don't get to that part in Utah, but certainly in hiring and housing, they address those questions. Bill and I and others are trying to work on laws where people can coexist in all of these realms and not be in conflict. And so in the book, for example, we've gathered a whole bunch of smart people like Professor Krotoszynski and others to talk about where you might try to blend those rights and how they might mesh. And that's, of course, a topic that's dear to many of your faculty here. Laid over all of these protections are protections for religious freedom. So state RFRAs, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the statute that was at the heart of Hobby Lobby, as well as heightened scrutiny. You'll see in the sort of salmon colors of the map, the dark red or the red colors of the map, there's heightened scrutiny for burdens on religious belief. Now, those laws got a really bad shake after Arizona and Indiana because religious people stood on the State House steps and said, quote, "We need religious protections, RFRA, to stave off gay rights." They grossly misunderstand what those laws would do. That is not a noble goal, and it shouldn't be dignified in the name of religion. But these laws are not bad all by themselves. Like, for example, is anybody from Kentucky? Any folks from, okay. So do you remember that Kentucky authorities threw 9 Amish men in jail for running their buggies at night, the black buggies? And the state authorities said you had to have an orange triangle on the back for safety. And the Amish were willing to put like a lantern in the buggy so people could see them. They didn't dispute the safety rationale. They were willing to put a gray triangle on the back of the buggy. But they couldn't use orange because it was flashy in their faith tradition. So RFRAs actually can do important work in keeping sort of religious burdens, you know, that the government sometimes feels that it can impose for whatever reason. It sort of tests whether those things are necessary. But the kinds of things that have to be put in place in SOGI non-discrimination laws aren't blanket, you get to step to the side because of your religious belief. They are specific ways of structuring the law so that the rights of both sets of folks actually coexist. Now, we're going to have this red-blue fault line across America until we figure out how to come together and talk about what those important issues were. We had a wonderful coffee this morning and really got down to it, talking about the Southern Baptists, talking about the LGBT movement. And what is it that each of us is trying to find? And interestingly enough, LGBT folks and people of faith have more in common than not. You know, so there's something that's core at the identity of both sets of folks. Religious people can't leave their home and sort of shed their religious identity like it's a pair of jeans and they just leave it on the floor. Gay people can't do that either. Trans people can't do that either. So we have to find a way in which the public square isn't sort of owned in part of the United States by one set of folks and to heck with the consequences for the other in any of these places. So we're going to have to write, I think, new legal scripts. And maybe, I know I'm out of time. Thank you to our timekeeper for that. Maybe in question and answer, we can talk about what those scripts would look like. But we have a culture war clash here that actually was really significant in the last couple of years around adoption, religious adoption agencies, and how, you know, they are going to, the rights of those agencies are going to, the interests of those agencies and continuing to operate are going to sort of coexist with folks who are asking to do nothing more than to adopt children. And I think there's a way in which we can have no folks turned away being told that their family is somehow less than, and have agencies that are doing important work stay open. And that should be their nirvana point. How do we find that? You guys are smart. It can be done. The question is whether we have the will to do it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, that's a little bit better. When I signed up for the Safe Zone training, which is a training to be tolerant towards the LGBTQ plus community, I was just doing it because my law school best friend dragged me to it, and there was free lunch, similar to something like today. And I sat thinking, everybody knows how to treat this community with respect, and we all know how to tolerate their lifestyle. Well, friends, I was wrong. I learned how my bias and stereotypes about transgenders may not have physically hurt anyone, but it did distort my view of this community. I just thought tolerance meant, even though I don't agree with you, I just let you do what you want and not say anything to you. Yet after I went through that Safe Zone training, the word tolerance means so much more to me. I am Black. I am a female. Since I'm a Black female, I'm always asking for others to be tolerant of my race and gender. Now I was being asked to be tolerant of another minority group, where a lot of people do not agree with their lifestyle and choose to retaliate against this group because of who they are. Just imagine that, someone being abusive towards you, bullying you because of who you are. That doesn't seem fair, does it? That is not tolerance, but the destruction of the societal balance and what makes America so promising to so many groups of people over the past centuries. Tolerance means accepting people for who they are and what they believe in, and trying to understand their identity and beliefs. Tolerance is about not allowing others to make someone feel bad because of their gender, race, clothing, or sexual orientation. It is truly acknowledging and practicing the golden rule we are all taught as children, that we should treat people the way they want to be treated. After going to the Safe Zone training, I made a promise to myself to always be a lending ear to any person that I knew that was a member of this community. I put myself in the transgender student's shoes and imagined, how would it feel if I couldn't go to the restroom all day? Or I made myself dehydrated and passed out because I was afraid to go to the restroom. Or not being able to go home over Christmas break because my parents kicked me out because of who I was and who I chose to love. I realized that the privilege I had as a heterosexual was something that still has not been extended to the members of this community. After being trained to be a counselor to the students of this community, I wanted to educate my family and my friends on what this community was about and how we could be more sympathetic and helpful to young people that identify with this community. As a minority, I can empathize with them. As a heterosexual, I can help other heterosexuals treat this community like normal people and be understanding towards their feelings, beliefs, and thoughts. Everyone has something so unique about them, which makes all of us a piece of the puzzle that creates America. So what is tolerance? Tolerance is the appreciation of every diverse person and the ability to live my life normally while letting others live their own lives normally. Thank you.
Hi, guys. I just want to say thank you to the Tolerance Means and the University of Alabama Law School for bringing us all together today. From the time I was 4 years old, I was already very confused. I attended a tiny Presbyterian preschool directly attached to the church. My teachers were nurturing, attentive, and beyond patient. But I couldn't help but wonder why I could be sent to timeout for kissing a boy and my consequences were different for kissing a girl. I never received a straightforward answer. And I was confused when I was told by my second grade teacher at Catholic school that I wanted to marry my best friend Miranda. because when I was met with the response, it was a nervous chuckle and a change of subject. These things may seem harmless, and they probably didn't have any ill will intended. But have you ever seen a little snowball race down a hill becoming bigger and bigger? By the time I was in high school, breaking news detailed a nun's speech that was given to a large Catholic high school in my area. She told the students why same-sex attraction was not normal or natural, and pointed an accusing finger at negligent parents and excessive viewing of pornography as the real gateway drugs into homosexuality and all related impure thoughts. I used to see "We are all God's children" stickers on bumpers and snickered to myself because it sounded sort of juvenile, like something that would have been painted on my old preschool's walls. But it appears that even such a simple statement is still very hard to comprehend for some educated adults. It may be uncomfortable for some to talk about, and others will say it doesn't affect them, so it's none of their business. They'll sit this one out. It's 2018, and we are past that. It's not enough to idly sit by and silently nod. Tears of joy should roll down their faces when parents speak to their sons and daughters coming out, because they managed to find the courage to speak up and become a potential target in the ever-present adversity that they face. If you do not identify on the LGBTQ, etc. spectrum, then be an advocate and be a voice. Neither party has to be demonized if one would only control their bubbling passion and anger. Just breathe and speak slowly. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. That's from Matthew 7. There's a serious problem when the measure you use is hate. I believe that's something most rational-minded beings can agree on, regardless of one's religious background, political party, or sexual identification. Replace hate with love, compassion, ambition for progress. Now begin the conversation. Thank you.
So I am sure the remarks of our dialogue catalysts and our scholarship recipients have sparked some questions, some ideas, or comments. And now is the time for you all to get involved. So if you would like to speak, please raise your hand and we will have one of our volunteers bring you a floating microphone. And also please tell us your name and affiliation. So whether you're a law student, an undergraduate student, a faculty member, community member, etc.
Thank you very much. My name is Kalen Bryant. I'm a 2L at the law school, which is Culver House now, I guess. Recently, I've been studying the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, and one of the things that I thought was interesting was in trying to balance the interests of both the religious community and the LGBTQ community, is how these communities are defined. I think that it's a little bit complicated sometimes for certain people to understand the it's a little bit complicated for certain people to understand the fact that the way that we treat these different communities is I guess predicated on this notion that I guess religious communities take advantage more of what they think and what they believe and how they act. And we define these communities separately from how we define different sexual orientations and races. We afford them oftentimes as supporters of these other communities, of minority communities. We afford them this understanding that they are these individuals, that they are born this way, and et cetera, et cetera. Whereas we treat religious communities differently. We have this expectation of how their actions affect other people. And I guess what I'm curious about is, what do the speakers think about how we define each of our communities? Is it appropriate to define them by what we expect of them, or are we just delving into this area of defining people by stereotypes if we do that? Is there a reason to define religious people by their creed or what actions we're expecting them to take, and not to, and a reason not to define minorities of various persuasions in that way?
Well, one thing I would like to just put on the table, you don't have to agree with this, but think about this. I do think there's more commonality among religious communities and minority sexual and gender communities in the following way, is that both kinds of groups are characterized based upon their identity, their self-proclaimed identity. So I'm a Presbyterian, and the main reason you have to believe that I'm a Presbyterian is that I'm telling you I'm an out-of-the-closet Presbyterian, okay? And many people who have sex with persons of the same sex are not openly gay or lesbian, okay? So we generally count as part of the gay and lesbian community mainly those people who are openly gay or lesbian. So part of it's self-identity. Part of it's also conduct. As a Presbyterian, Calvin teaches us that we should engage in certain conduct, and we don't always. It's generally good conduct and virtuous conduct. We don't always live up to that. As sexual or gender minorities, we engage in conduct. Again, we think it's beneficent, but we don't always live up to that. And then each group is associated with certain ideas and concepts. There's certain things that I believe as a Presbyterian, which most other Presbyterians believe. And then as a gay person, there's certain things that I believe, not about the economy or politics, but about sexuality and gender, very importantly, that are fairly common within my community. So I do think, and I think for both communities, it is ridiculous for people to say, well, I'm going to penalize you because you're a religion I don't like. You've chosen that religion and I don't like it. Same is true, it seems to me, of sexuality and gender. These are not choices like the ones you make when you go to Walmart and buy a pair of jeans. These are integral to your identity. So that's the way I look at it. And different, you all are millennials, many of you, you know, because your identity might have something to do with Instagram and stuff like that, and that's a further advancement of some of these ideas. So that's, I think, a productive way of thinking about these things. And I've written very extensively that a lot of religions, including the Mormons and the Catholics, have gone through a lot of the same kinds of things that transgender persons, gay and lesbian persons have gone through as well, in terms of stigmatization based upon self-proclaimed identity, beliefs, and assumed conduct.
I'll just add to some extent, that's a really terrific question. And it's a hard one, because if you're going to try to write a law that tries consciously to blend two communities, you know, there is a task to say, okay, think about the small employer exception in Title VII. Okay, you have to have a cutoff at some point if you're going to say that the smallest employers aren't going to be regulated. And that's a definitional problem too that we always have in the law. Will we set that at 15? Will we set it at 5? Will we set it at 1? And it falls at different places in different states. So it's a definitional consideration. If you're going to say that religious employers have, as Title VII says, a special need to be able to hire people who share their faith, which often we shorthand as co-religionists. It may be broader than that. Maybe people who share their faith and abide by it. You know, in other words, they follow certain sort of shared beliefs about conduct, no sex outside of marriage, for example. You're still going to have to say, what is a religious employer in order to be able to write that statute? And the lawmakers here know well that, you know, there'll be a lot of conversation about how broad or how narrow we make that specific definition. And in law, lots of the work is done in definitions. So I think you ask a really hard question, and that's, I think, where a lot of the conversation about how we live together as one people actually has to be had.
Awesome. We have a question here. Can we get a mic? Yeah. For the live stream, let's use a mic. Whoever's closest.
We also have some questions from Twitter. Thank you. So I'll read one of those, but after yours.
Hi there. My name is Hamilton Milwee. I'm a 2L here at the University of Alabama Culver House School of Law. I am kind of curious about, in today's climate politically, where compromise and discussion is relatively absent, what kind of incentives and what kind of ways can we as a society or as a political group incentivize state legislatures to take this up?
Well, that's a good question. The first thing I would say, that's just absolutely right on. Let's have a show of hands. How many of you think that there's a major problem in America about the polarization of discussion on issues like this one? Okay, well, as you can see, I raised my hand, so I could not agree with you more, the premise of your question. And I think that makes discussions like this very important. You've got to start somewhere. And why not start with this issue that has been so divisive and is very emotional, you know, and recognize the emotions of religious faith traditions for whom this is a big shock, as well as the emotions of LGBTQI people for whom this is a very major dignitary move. Let me answer your question in two ways. One, let's just think crassly about what are the motivations of legislators to take this up, including like city councils. Well, I think there are motivations. And it often starts with business people. That businesses do not flourish in these kind of divisive climates. Businesses want to lower the stakes of all of this, and they want freedom for all to spend money. Okay? They want freedom for all. And very often businesses are facilitators and supporters of these kinds of dialogues. Okay? So that's one stakeholder group, very important. A second stakeholder group clearly are religious traditions, which are very heterogeneous on these issues. Many of the states that we visit are predominantly Roman Catholic. This is predominantly evangelical in its many different flavors. And frankly, you know, there is a growing discourse within evangelical communities in the direction of tolerance or even acceptance. But you don't have to go there. An incentive, to be very blunt, you've asked an honest question, I'll give you a very honest answer. If I were a leader of the Southern Baptist Church, and I'm a devoted Presbyterian, so I'm not going to change. But if I were a leader of the Southern Baptist Convention, and J.D. Greear, who's the new president, I think might be open to this. I would say this is the time for us to begin serious discussions. You know, the LDS Church is not a haven of New York Times liberals. It is a very traditionalist church. Because among young people, there is much greater enthusiasm for marriage equality, equal treatment of LGBTQI people, etc. And do I, as a church, want to turn my back on that? Because their future is you all. And those of you who are evangelicals, Roman Catholics, Mormons, Presbyterians, Methodists, whatnot, please speak up in your faith denominations in favor of tolerance, at the very least, in favor of discourse. So it's an uphill battle in some states, I realize, but that's the second. And then LGBTQI communities. Sometimes those communities are the hardest to get to the bargaining table when it means making agreements that provide extensive religious rights. And honestly, I personally think, this is where I come from, the LGBTQI community is very heterogeneous on this issue. A lot like the religious groups. But here's where I stand, and for those of you who are LGBTQI, just think about this. Where I stand is, I'm very elderly. I know what it's like to be called a faggot, as I was by the chair of the appointments committee at the University of Virginia, where I was denied tenure. I know what it feels like to be discriminated against and to be treated in an undignified way. And I actually don't want that for religious minorities. You heard me right. The country is moving in a direction where the faith traditions that do not accept marriage equality are going to be religious minorities, the same way, in somewhat the same ways, that being LGBTQI is a sexual or gender minority. And I actually don't like that. I don't support that. I don't want them to feel any kind of penalty or disparagement, which does happen, maybe not in Alabama, but it does happen at Yale. It does happen in Washington. And I'm not in favor of that. And people can call it payback, people can say it's this, it's that, and I would call it unjust. And that is exactly the way, you know, tit for tat is exactly the way you get to where we are in America today. And I challenge you all as a generation to say no to that. And if someone calls you a bad name or it feels like you're being disparaged in a debate or a conversation, turn the other cheek. Mention the golden rule. I love that. Yeah, the golden rule. But then there's also turn the other cheek.
Let me just say, I think Bill's on the right track, that there are people in the faith community who understand well, especially today, what it is to be targeted for who they are. So think of the way that we have treated many Americans in just the last some bit of time. And I think asking people to remember the golden rule, but also remember what it feels like for them to be treated for who they are wrongly, I think that's a way forward. Too many people in America are actually afraid, right? Whether they're LGBT persons that can't be who they are, or whether they're religious folks who feel that they can't, you know, continue to hold or express a traditional view. One of the devices that Utah used was what I call a sort of two-way street protection. You know, sort of said, look, you know, if you go to an Equality Utah parade on Saturday, you shouldn't, or on Sunday, Saturday, Sunday, or Pride Parade, which was just here, shouldn't be fired on Monday for that. And if you talk to folks about the sermon that you heard on Sunday, shouldn't be fired or stripped of your law license or your business license or any other thing for that on Monday. And so I think we can marry, literally, bad pun maybe, but, you know, marry people's, you know, interest here in important ways and use those devices in the law. It reminds me of a question we got on Twitter, and thank you for those. I'm going to announce the winner in just a moment. But one of the questions was, and I think from Sarah, how can we use sort of an appeal to people's religious values, Christian or otherwise, and trying to find a way forward? And I think the Golden Rule is an example of that. Your essays both are examples of that. And I think asking people in their own tradition to think about justice in the Catholic tradition, for example. It's not just to fire someone for who they are. And it's not just to punish them for their religious belief either, right? And so we've got to think about how we make those work together. And then finally about the economic interests, you know, we're all trying to attract the best talent, right? And the states that have protected LGBT folks from discrimination actually have a competitive economic edge there, right? And we should remember that and try to be as inclusive as we can. I want to make sure we get one Twitter question, so if it's okay for me to read that. Absolutely. This is from, let me go to the very bottom, from Amanda. So where's Amanda, by the way? Excellent. Hey, Amanda. Okay, so how do we, you say, inspire people who believe that this is not their fight or their business to empathize with people whose rights are in jeopardy? And then you continue, how can we inspire new allies and religious allies to join the cause? And actually, our students probably are as adept at this question, so let's start with you, Shannon. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, can you guys hear me? I think there's a lot of undergraduate organizations like Spectrum that have really helped out and been reaching out, and also people are very into voting based on what they want to see change in Alabama, and I've like had many speakers in my political science classes come up for the first 5 minutes and encourage people to vote that may not have otherwise. So I really enjoyed that, and also I think social media, especially with undergraduates and people my age, can really influence their opinions. So definitely being more active on social media, and yeah, just not remaining silent on the matter and thinking that that means tolerance, because that's not what tolerance is.
If everyone thought that this wasn't their fight for a particular issue, none of us would be in this room. If there are people in the 1950s and 1960s who didn't think civil rights was their issue, a lot of these black students, we wouldn't be here. If a lot of these supporters for the women's suffrage movement didn't think it wasn't their fight, women wouldn't be here. If the colonists didn't think that it was our fight to gain freedom from Mother England, none of us would be here. This would not be America. See, what you have to do with people, you have to make that connection. You have to make it matter to them. You have to do things like this training. Put themselves in those people's shoes. And sometimes take the principles like we talked about, like Christianity. There's nothing in the Bible that says anything about condoning someone and being abusive towards someone because of who they are. I just think it's just really about, like I said, the golden rule, just treating people right and making sure we all have a safe place for everyone. Thank you.
Amen.
Amen. So,
Let's get another question or two.
okay, I'll keep reading from, is it okay?
Is everybody else live?
Live?
Live questions are also good.
Yeah.
Okay. And FYI, I know I have lots of students who have classes at
Okay.
1, so if you need to head on out for...
I'm going to announce our winner then.
Okay,
just
yeah,
so
let's do that.
This person sees me so I can write you a check. Sydney Duncan, is Sydney with us? Oh my gosh, Sydney. I didn't put it together with your last name, so
Okay.
we're going to continue. Sydney,
There's
thank you.
an honorable person.
Thank you, Sydney, for tweeting. Okay, on questions. Any others while I wait? This gets randomly generated. I don't do the picking, so I have to wait.
And for those who have to go to class, if the winner is announced and it is you, I
Yeah.
will contact you and you can come by my office to pick
Hey,
up
did
your
any of you
check.
class people, you want to throw out a question as you leave? You can do a shout out as you leave. Like the president on the helicopter. Usually a shout out thing of some sort.
Oh, there's a question over here, guys.
Hey, nice to meet you. I'm McGavin Brown. I'm a 2L. So once you say that a certain perspective is a fundamental constitutional right, how can any other perspective be equally dignified?
Well, when you say something's a fundamental constitutional right, it means the state cannot discriminate, against you. And freedom of religion is actually the first. It's in the First Amendment, which is the First Amendment, right? Free speech, we take it for granted, and we should not, okay? So free speech, freedom of religion, etc. And so I do think, and I put it to you, I do think that Obergefell turns the corner, that it is no longer legitimate for any government openly to discriminate based upon sexual orientation, gender identity, right? Including the military, because this is a live debate all over America, okay? And I think the same is true about religion. And that's I think Masterpiece Cake Shop is an excellent decision. I don't care who wins or loses. Mr. Phillips won. Good. But I think what's great about the decision is that Justice Kennedy said, who wrote Obergefell, he said, look, we said in Obergefell, we think that lesbian and gay couples should not be discriminated against by the state. But we also are going to say in Obergefell dictum that the minority justices just disparaged and made fun of. But Kennedy said, dictum, but this does not mean that we want religious groups to lose any of their constitutional rights. And then in Masterpiece, he delivered on that. He said, yeah, we meant it. And 3 of the justices in the Obergefell majority were all with it, with that result and that message, okay? So that's what I think about fundamental constitutional rights, is that that is an element of commonality. Now, the cases you read about, and much of what we're talking about here today, are statutes that create causes of action against private individuals. And that's not that's not a constitutional right. Though I think we consider it an important set of rights that you have not to be discriminated against. And then there are situations that arise all too commonly where my dignity can only be verified or respected by you giving up some of your dignity. And those are the hard cases. But the government itself, should not be in a situation of discriminating against either cluster of groups. That's the way I see the debate, anyway. Thanks, Mr. Brown.
That's a great question, Mr. Brown. I'm going to come right back to that. And we don't have your last name, so I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this right, but Nwando?
She just left? Yes.
Does anybody know her last name?
Yes, I have it.
Okay, then I'm going to write her a check because she is our social media engagement prize winner.
And she is a student.
She is a 1L, yes.
She's a legit student, so this is good. We've succeeded. Thank you, Sydney. I think your question is a terrific one. We often have to write laws. The senator knows well, we have to write laws that leave room for everyone. And when we start talking about constitutional principles, which many people in this particular debate, but others often do, they're claiming it as a trump card. Both sides. They're saying, oh, see, my constitutional principle means no room for you. And then the other person also holds up a constitutional principle and says no room for you. And lawmakers have both of those things in front of them. And judges interpreting these often have both of these things in front of them. And judges, unlike lawmakers, are not in a terrific position to write the script about how we live together. That's exactly the task of lawmakers. That's exactly the task. Those constitutional principles should matter to how thickly they try to make sure that we all work together in the public square and can coexist. But the strong form of those claims should not be used to say, and your interest doesn't matter over here. This is one American people. We are one American people. We have to start acting like we are one American people. I think that's really the project.
Awesome. All righty, so join me in thanking our speakers.
We thank you all for coming.
And thank you all for coming.
Tweets.
Yes, thank you. They were terrific.
Tweets and Instagramming or whatever.
Absolutely.
Whatever language you speak.
All right. I want to take a moment to recognize other individuals who submitted essays. If you are still here, yes, please stand up. Alexandra Sevenson, Sean McCander, Yasmin Nana Yaboa, Rolanda Tina Turner at the undergraduate level. And then at the graduate and professional level, we have Mindy Kidd, Cindy Jones, Mindy's in the back, Cindy Jones, Julie Bentz, Davis Riley, Jaleesa Milton, and Tiffany Tolliver.
Yeah, all terrific essays. Yes. Thank you.
I'd also like to give a special thank you to the following people without whom this program could not be possible. Professor Robin Fretwell Wilson, Professor Bill Eskridge, Carla Gall, Hannah Burnett, the American Constitution Society, Jared Blanton, the Federalist Society, Colin Keller, Outlaw, Gabriella Olenberg, Professor Meredith Render, Professor Ron Korozinski, and our volunteers, Josh Kravick, Jared Blanton, Chase Arnold, Alan Slater, Colin Keller, Jordan Laporta, Gabriella Olenberg, Robbie Thompson, and Sarah Hughes. And so we have a little something for our scholarship winners.
Oh, good.
That's you.
That's you all.
That's you. And then we also have a little something for Professors Eskridge and Wilson.
That's us. Congratulations.
Oh, I love that.
Isn't that beautiful? Oh, my God. How are we going to keep
Oh,
get that?
oh my goodness gracious.
Oh, my God. Go Bama.
Thank you all for
Does
joining.
that fit in the overhead?
It does not fit in the overhead compartment. Thank you all for joining us. We truly appreciate you. For all of my volunteers and all of my co-sponsors, if you will hang around afterwards, I have something for you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Nice job, guys. Thank you. So,
Oh, lovely.
can we get
That's
a
a great
picture
idea.
with you? Can we get a pic? Do you mind being our photographer and getting a pic? You are our photographer. Thank you. Yeah. Do you mind getting a picture of the four of us?
Yeah, you're going to do that, and then also on our iPhones.
Yeah, our iPhones. Let's see. What's the best way to do this so that?
What's the best background?
Oh, we're gonna come
here,
right
okay.
up front.
Jared, Robbie, Colin, if I can get you. Thank you so much.
Dialogue.
We need Daiquiri. Daiquiri.
Oh, Daiquiri. Daiquiri.
Half my body behind me.
No. Okay, get my phones with the battery. Okay, all right. So everyone has to cycle.